this video, we're going to talk about collective bargaining. We're going to get a glimpse inside that black box. That's coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, and the host of HR Shop Talk. On the show, you get all kinds of insight into all things that have to do with HR. If you like what you see, subscribe to see other episodes in the show or subscribe to the podcast to keep learning from my smart and experienced guests. Today, my guest is Jody Fraser. Jody's the Director of Labour Relations and a member of the Alberta Labour Relations Board. She's led countless rounds of negotiations, and I'm excited to continue learning about collective bargaining. Hi, Jody, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to this. The last one had a really great reception.
Great.
Yeah. So just to dive right in. So last time we talked about the preparation for collective bargaining. Now we're going to talk about the actual act of bargaining. So to get us started, can you talk about the stages of collective bargaining?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in our last discussion that there was lots of prep work with regard to the stages. Yeah. There's things like that are legislatively required. So first of all, you need to share your inbound proposal. I think we talked about that a little bit the last time, about all of the work that it takes to get ready. But there's that inbound proposal, which basically just tells the union everything that you want to talk about. You might suggest some language. You might be, having some new articles in the collective agreement. There could be some legislative changes. There's all kinds of reasons why you would make those changes, and you would bundle those all up in what's called an inbound proposal. You would also accept a proposal from the union, so they would take a look and do their homework as well, and then provide you with a proposal. You would take some time to take a look at those proposals, and then you move right into what we call active bargaining at the table, where you have discussions, agendas, working through all of the issues in a coordinated fashion.
You're not the only person sitting on a bargaining committee. I mean,
I am not.
So who else, what are the roles of people you want on your bargaining committee?
Right. My experience has been that it's always great to have someone there to keep things organized and take a lot of notes. You always want to capture your notes and the discussion. So I find that having someone there to keep notes, to remind me what the agenda items are, to be keeping track of the homework that we need to do, whether we have agreement on things.
Before you move on to the next person, does that person who's doing that, like administrative support, is that typically an organizational admin person, or do you pull in a junior person? Who do you use for that role?
Sure. I have someone at my tables right now. The people that we have doing that role, they are aware of labor relations, and so they do help me, watch for language choices as well as unintended consequences. So as we are going through and writing new language, they're like, oh, don't forget, this little clause here impacts another article, so we'll have to open that one up. So they do actually have quite a lot of labor relations experience.
Okay, so that's role one. Who else?
Then I like to have individuals who actually are in the business and are the folks who actually have to implement and work with this collective agreement every day with the frontline unionized staff. So whether that could be a manager, anyone who obviously isn't a member of the union, I like to have those folks there because they're my test. Does this make sense? This isn't just the HR shop saying this is what we're supposed to do, but does this make sense operationally for us at the front lines?
Okay. Anybody else? Well, there's you. What are you doing?
I do a lot of talking, and then depending on how you have your committee set up, right now I'm the only person who can actually enter into an agreed to article or an agreed to discussion. So unless I say that it's agreed, I'm the only one that can agree to and sign off language on behalf of the employer.
You've kind of talked about 3 roles, really. How many people are there?
When you take a look at Alberta, there's some sectors. I think healthcare have quite big tables. They like to have a lot of their folks, especially when you have a variety of jobs across the organization. They probably have more folks on the union team than you would on the employer team. I try and keep the bargaining teams relatively tight, but again, it depends on how many unique and different areas you have within your organization. I think we've got 5.
Okay.
One position I did forget was a finance position. We've recently added finance to the table, and then we've also added a communications specialist.
So a term I think we've often heard is bargaining in good faith. What does that mean?
Well, it's required in Alberta. It's required that you bargain in good faith, and essentially that means that you need to follow all of the legislative requirements around bargaining and come from a good place in order to enter into language. So if you know, for example, that there's a big change coming in your organization, you would have an obligation to let that union that you're negotiating with know that these changes are coming, because they have to have an opportunity to understand the business and adjust their proposals to make room for, whatever the organization is going to look like in the future.
Right. What's an example of a behavior that's not in good faith?
So a behavior that's not in good faith would be not really wanting to participate in bargaining and just kind of showing up and going through the motions, but not actually making any progress. And that's for both parties. We're both held to the same rules.
So I think something else we've often heard is there's a bunch of things that management is not allowed to do, and maybe the union is not allowed to do while bargaining is going on. Can you take us through some of those things?
Yeah, so that was one of those things that I was talking about that can lead to an unfair labor practice or that bad faith bargaining, is if you are fundamentally changing the rules of the organization while bargaining is going on. So there's this concept in Alberta and many other areas around the statutory freeze, which requires you to not make substantive changes in the operations of your organization as you're bargaining, because really what it does is it doesn't allow the union to be able to really understand the business that they're currently bargaining for their members, so that we don't fundamentally change, I guess, the conditions of employment for those particular bargaining group, and that the union, it's fair.
Right. Bargaining can sometimes go on for a very long time, though, and management needs to manage and to respond to, conditions in the environment. How do you balance that?
Yes, I think that's where you need to have regular ongoing communications with your union, and you have an opportunity to disclose. So if something substantial happens and a significant change occurs, you need to bring that to the bargaining table and you need to talk about it. And then you need to talk about what it is that you as the employer, what you're doing to help either mitigate through those, or are you closing? There's so many things that cause quite a huge ripple effect when you're at the bargaining table.
Isn't there a bunch of rules about communicating with employees and stuff like that?
So those are still your employees. Just because they're a member of a union doesn't mean that you can't communicate with your employees. It's around the courtesy of giving the other party an opportunity to know that we are going to communicate with our employees about X. It's all part of that relationship building that you do over the course of bargaining, but you can communicate to your employees. You just can't tell them how to vote.
If you found this informative, subscribe to see all the episodes and comment. Have you been involved in bargaining? Why do you do it? Let us know in the comment section below. So I just asked the audience if they participate in bargaining, why they do it. Why do you do it?
I actually, I'm not sure. I feel it's actually quite a rewarding job. There's a real sense of accomplishment within a team in order to get an agreement, to work through those agreements, to really dig down into the business and why do we do these things, and are they tenets of why we are as an organization, and should they be? So there's a lot of opportunity to ask questions. And it is probably one of those great opportunities where you get to see the fruits of all of the discussions. And you see that through the updates in the language from the various sections or articles in the collective agreement. And again, I know I mentioned the last time, implementing this collective agreement is also a very important piece. And knowing that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then you actually get to implement it at the end. It's very rewarding.
As I said in the last episode, I sat on a bargaining committee a while back, but then towards the end, it all went into a back room. The most of the bargaining committee sat at the table, and while we waited for those people in the back room to come back out. So what was happening there, and how are those difficult 11th hour decisions being made?
Sometimes as the chief negotiators, you do want to have hallway conversations, because we recognize that there's probably several agendas, on both committees, individuals, whether it's from the local of the union or there's managers in the room for the employer. And a hallway conversation is a great opportunity to have those agendas parked and know that the two people who actually are responsible for entering into the agreement with each other on behalf of the parties can have a very open and frank conversation about what's doable and what's not. And then the other agendas can remain silent. And then what it allows us to do is to come back and help manage our committees. So we kind of come together, come up with a decision, and we know where we can, make that 100% effort to come together and come to an agreement. And then we go back and manage our committees, because that's the other whole part of the role as the chief spokesperson, is also making sure that you're managing your committee and their expectations.
Okay, talk to me about that, seeing as you raised the subject. What do you need to do to manage your committee?
What I tend to do is I try to make sure that people on our committee understand that there's, situation A, B, C, D. If situation A doesn't work out, then we might move to situation B, or we might take, parts of situation D and C to create a new agreement, or a new solution to whatever the problem is that we're working through. So it's that ability to be agile. And so you want to have lots of brains around the table thinking about those solutions, but sometimes you have to just pick the best of what you've already talked about with your committee, speak to the other chief spokesperson, then you come up with the best of all of the other alternatives, and then you got to go back and tell your committee this is why you did it.
So what's the closest, and I think this is something people will be curious about, what's the closest you've ever come to going on strike, and how did you manage that?
So the sector that I've done most of my negotiating in has been in the public sector. And so only recently in 2017 have we had access to actually strike. So in my experience, I have had or participated in a round of bargaining where I was not the chief spokesperson. I was a member of the committee, and it was with an arbitrator where I was making phone calls to some of the principals who are the organization's decision makers at 12:30 a.m. the following day after bargaining all day, because we were so close.
Right.
We just didn't want to, leave it to come back the next day. So we were bargained quite late into the night, and I'm happy to say that very early the next morning we all went home. We got back together the next morning, and we had a tentative agreement, which was really good.
That was my experience as well when I was on this committee. That that last day we were there till like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Is that common?
Yeah, I just think, sometimes you decide, are cooler heads going to prevail in the morning when you all have a little bit more sleep, or is it better to just keep going and you've got the momentum and carry on with that? So it's a game day decision, I guess. But I think most of the time we try and just keep going and get it done.
So sometimes that can be a really difficult process, and resulting in tension and some bitterness. How do you repair relationships with unions after it's over?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we definitely have in our bargaining implementation plan is around that healing and change management and communications. And so that's one of those key pieces of having a communications individual or specialist on our bargaining team, because they can watch and help for those things. And so I do ask the panel member to take a look and really be thinking about, as we're making some of these difficult decisions, what does the communication look like back to our managers? What does the communication look like, or change management for our organization to be able to go through, and how do we do it together? And so we do spend some time implementing the collective agreement once it's ratified with the union to talk about, how are we going to kind of put some of the ugliness behind us and move forward. And then having that person keeping track of the discussion also really helps, because you can kind of see what the issue is and what seemed to be the germination period, and then how it became contentious. And then you can kind of go back and take a look at how you're going to deal with that. So it's not, you have stuff at the table, but you basically, I think I've said before, you're bargaining all the time.
Right.
It's not just something that you put a hat on and say, okay, now we're bargaining, and now I'm going to go do another job. You really do it all the time.
It's interesting what you just said, and it led me to other thoughts about, morale. A lot of times in HR, we're talking about engagement and maintaining a level of morale, and there's debate about that. But I would think that this could seriously impact morale. It can impact trust, which then impacts potentially the bottom line of the organization. And how mindful are you of that? And how much effort do you put into, as you say, healing? I kind of like that word, actually.
Yeah, I think it's on all of our committee's mind. Honestly, it's what hills are you wanting to die on, but what's the cost of the hill? Because there's just financial costs as well as relationship costs, and all of those need to be costed out. That's also part of your your planning as you're getting ready for bargaining, and you're planning strike training or strike planning. Right. When you go and if you do have a strike, what is the plan to bring people back to campus? You've had managers that have worked 60, 70, 80 hours a week for however long the strike may have worked. You've had people try and cross picket lines. There could be fractions within the union ranks. There could be fractions within the management ranks. And so it's a big thing to be thinking about. And that relationship plays a huge importance in our planning as we're going forward, and really, when do we want to, kind of push the envelope or put salt on the wound, and when we need to let it go, and hear, acknowledge, and move on.
Okay, and final question here. What is one thing or two that you wish the rest of the organization really knew and understood about collective bargaining?
Honestly, it's not necessarily about the process of collective bargaining, but is reading the collective agreement once it's in place. I can't express enough as a labor relations practitioner and someone who puts in so much effort into bargaining. Please read the collective agreement. It's important.
That's a good one. All right. Thanks, Jody. That was great. I did another episode with Jody about preparing for collective bargaining, as I said, and that episode is right here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.